Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM Podcast.
Thanks very much for joining us again for our season reviews. And this time it's episode 3, Williams, looking at their 2021 season. And it was all the progress that we've been waiting for the historic outfit, I think. 23 points they managed by the end of it, going from 7 points in 2018, 1 point in 2019, nothing in 2020. You know, to get 23 points and an 8th place constructors finish is great news for the team. And I think it really comes down to them finally capitalising on events that offered opportunities to score, whereas in the past, they kind of squandered them. So, for example, in Hungary, they made the most out of the chaos to grab their double points that they were both very excited about. And of course, Russell's excellent qualifying in the wet, where individual quality could make the difference in Belgium. And the following farcical non-race presented him with a free podium at half points. So it was. I struggled to say that he got a podium. He didn't really get a podium.
No.
I don't think anybody should have got any points for that race, as I said at the time. But you know, they're not going to be complaining. They're going to take those points because it pretty much secured their position. I think it would have been a lot tighter between them and Alfa Romeo across the season if they hadn't got that. So I'm sure they're not complaining. But you know, with the Williams family officially out of the sport, and founder Frank obviously sadly passing away in November this year, this is the first season with Dorilton Capital at the financial helm, and in general it was a positive one. And the vibe around the team is that it's entered the modern F1 game just in time for the new regulations. So Shane, are you feeling the positive vibes around Williams, or is it still, were you hoping for a little bit more?
No, I'm happy where Williams are at the moment. I think I said at the beginning of the year I really wanted Williams to score points or George for points. I said that at the end of every single podcast until it happened. And obviously in Hungary, we saw a double points finish, which was fantastic. Latifi finished in 7th and George finished in 8th. They both played, well, I think George played more of the team game, or definitely offered out the team game, but Latifi ultimately had the pace and had the track position, so beat George to that 7th place finish. Let's just talk about Belgium for a second, because Williams have had a fantastic year. And I don't want to say that Belgium wasn't deserved, because actually George's qualifying lap on the Saturday was superb, was absolutely superb, and he deserved to put it into P2. And I would have loved nothing more than to see, you know, George take that fight to all the top teams going around Spa. He probably would have been dropped within 10 laps, but it would have been great to see him battling Hamilton, Verstappen, Sergio Perez, you know, all these top drivers in the top teams, and seeing how well he did. It gave us a glimpse of potentially what would have been his future the following year, but which we didn't know at the time. So George finished in 2nd place in the Belgium Grand Prix, and scored 9 points. So he's finished the year on 16 points, take 9 away from that, and he actually finishes on 7 points, the same amount of his teammate, which I find quite interesting. So you know, if you're taking Belgium out of the equation, which a lot of people think that we should, because there was no race, it was a safety car race, and that was it. So take 9 points away, and actually George finishes on the same points as Nicholas does. But also that puts Williams on 14 points and Alfa Romeo on 13 points. So like you alluded to at the start of the podcast, without that 2nd place finish, it would have been so much more tighter. And actually, maybe that would have spurred Alfa Romeo on a little bit to try and get an extra point or two towards the end of the season. But that's not about Alfa Romeo. This is all about Williams and their progression. And like you said, throughout the last couple of years, they've gone down, but now they're starting to go up. What do you make of their season? What do you make of their season? Who do you want to start with, George or Nicholas, or just the team in general?
Well, just looking at the you know, talking about that close fight that we would have possibly had between, or it was a close fight, but it would have been much closer if it weren't for that podium, like you said. By the end of the season, their lack of development and some reliability issues really started to hurt them, I think. It made those points opportunities feel as far away as they had been the previous year by the end of the season. And the best performance after the Russian Grand Prix was Latifi's P12 in Saudi Arabia. So they had that sort of smattering of points finishes. I think George got like double, sort of 2 races where he got points one after the other. And then after that, it sort of evaporated away a little bit. So, but it was still a historic season for them as well, celebrating 750 Grand Prix starts in Monaco. And we had Simon Roberts stepping down as a team principal. So it was kind of all change for them in some ways, but also keeping that progression. I don't think Williams has felt so stable for so many seasons. They really had a sense of stability about them. Looking at the drivers individually, let's start with Russell. 16 points, obviously, with his one podium. Missed a Saturday. Obviously continued to perform head and shoulders above his teammate, really out-qualifying him 20 times to 2 and 15 times to 5 in the race results. He obviously goes into the next season as a full-on Mercedes man at last, but I think his apprenticeship at Williams will have been an excellent learning experience for him. I talked about it before when we were talking about in the Haas episode that sometimes it's good for these high-potential drivers to experience a bit of a struggle at the back because it's like, I don't know, just from my purely sort of layman experience, whenever I play like the Formula One games, and this is a slightly sort of glib way of looking at it, I suppose, but when I play the Formula One games, I don't want to start in the fastest car. It's kind of no fun. I want to start at the back and work my way up. It's kind of exciting to do it that way. And I think it builds a certain kind of character towards the racing that you don't take anything for granted and that you just strive to do your best and focus on your performance and don't let it get to your head, basically. So I think in that way, it will be good for George because he's obviously a driver with so much potential. You already talked about his Belgium lap. His 4 points finishes in 5 races in the mid-season are his highlights, really. Plus an excellent P3 start in Russia as well, which I had forgotten about until I looked at all the results. I was like, oh yeah, he was in P3, started there. Despite his notable performances, however, I do hope that George hasn't let too much of it get to his head as he goes into it, because he is still young and I think somewhat untested in the kind of fights that Mercedes will be expecting of him. He was superb in Sakir in 2020 when he stepped into that Mercedes, but one race does not a potential champion make. And his conduct at Imola after colliding with Bottas, I think, left a lot to be desired. His team should take some responsibility for that as well. I would have just told him, shut up and get back to the garage. Stop. Come and review the footage and calm down before you say anything. And he really sort of let it get to him and quite publicly as well. I wasn't too impressed with his incident with Sainz at Silverstone as well, and neither were the stewards. Obviously, ended up with a grid penalty. I think that was in the sprint race. Yeah,
because it sent Sainz to the back of essentially qualifying, or he qualified at the back then. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and he also was a bit reluctant to kind of take the blame for that, as I recall. But it is very, very exciting that we're going to get to see him start alongside Lewis Hamilton, and we'll see how he fares now that he's got the big seat that he always wanted. How did you feel about Russell's season?
Well, you've summarised it quite well. I just want to, it's been nice listening to it. And also you've highlighted his highs, because there have been many, but also his low points, the accidents, especially with Bottas and Imola. That was a real turning point. Not for me, but as a fan, like, you got to see a different side of Russell and how he reacted to situations and how maybe the pressure got to him. Now, on one hand, you can say actually fighting for points this whole season and all of last season, he's dealt with the pressure and he's managed to fight his way through the pressure to secure those points. He had an amazing qualifying lap, like you said, in Russia as well. He put it on P3 in qualifying. But fighting for the odd occasional point and then fighting for the top points is a completely different ballgame. It's a lot more pressure, I should imagine. It's a different set of circumstances. And like you said, I'm glad he's had these couple of years in Williams and he wasn't promoted too soon, because I think that would have been a mistake. He's learned how to deal with himself and how to deal with mistakes, which I think is really important for any driver. But he's about to go up against some of the best in the business. You've got Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion. You've got Max Verstappen now, who's a world champion of his own. And I have no doubt that they won't be at the top of their game next year fighting for that top position. And in comes George Russell. It might not be the fairy tale he's wanting. He might not be able to fight Lewis and fight Max and fight the Red Bulls as much as he anticipated. There's a long way to go. Like
he might have to accept to play in the team game, whereas he was the sort of the special child in many ways. This time he might be the second fiddle to Lewis Hamilton. I think he might find that hard to accept.
He's just got to play the long game, because if he does well at Mercedes, he he will be there for quite some time, I should imagine. Lewis isn't going to stick around for I don't want to say much longer. I wouldn't want to put a time or how many years on it, but George is a lot younger than Lewis, so his time in Mercedes is at the beginning, whereas Lewis's is arguably coming towards the end. I just hope that he handles it with grace and takes the opportunity well and doesn't, I don't want to say doesn't cause too many issues, because actually the Nico and Lewis era was fantastic, seeing them fight on track. I don't know. It's very interesting. I'm very excited to see him in the Mercedes. Like you mentioned, we've already seen him as Sakir in 2020, was it? Which was fantastic. But that was a no pressure situation. Like I spoke about the Haas drivers. He got called up to go into that car with zero experience, zero simulator time. He didn't even have the seat which fit him. He was almost too tall for the car, and he couldn't reach, the pedals were too short. So there was a lot going on, and there was no expectations. It was to get that car round and to pick up as many points as possible. And, we don't need to dive into what happened that race, but we knew that he was good against Bottas. Will he be the same against Hamilton? Who knows? I'm looking forward to it. But as for Williams, we're delving on to Mercedes there a little bit. But as for Williams, I'm excited to see where that team goes in the next year, because I think they're on the right path. Unlike Alfa Romeo and Haas, where I'm not too certain how they're going to deal with the next couple of years, I think Williams have got the financial backing. They've still got that sense of family, that sense of pride, and they are heading in that right direction. And I don't think the momentum's going to be broken. I think they'll be better next year.
Let's put the spotlight on Latifi for a bit as well. After a fairly slow start to his F1 career, I think it's fair to say that Latifi has become pretty dependable number 2 for Williams. His qualifying results still lag behind what the car is clearly capable of, but he still managed to bag 2 points finishes. And if it weren't for, you've already mentioned, of course, if it weren't for Russell's free podium, then they would have ended up with the same points at the end of the season. So he pulled his weight, definitely. And obviously he brings some decent sponsorship with him, but with the Dorilton acquisition, that might be somewhat less of a factor in retaining him. I'm not sure exactly, but either way, don't have too much to say about Latifi. He seems like a very likeable chap. We'll see how he does in his third year with Albon alongside him, but I think he definitely pulled his weight and was very dependable. It's funny to think of it. I was trying to think of on-track accidents, and then I realised, oh yeah, he did have that rather important one right in the last race.
Yeah, there was
that sort of championship deciding accident that he had. But overall, I think Latifi was, again, another one of these slightly more anonymous drivers on the grid. But yeah, he did what he needed to do to bring points home and helped secure their position in the championship. So I think he should be very, very happy with that season. And I'm not surprised at all that the Williams have kept hold of him, because what with wanting that stability, as we mentioned already, them keeping that upward trajectory, at this case, I think it's a case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So maintain that position and keep that familial atmosphere, like you mentioned. So going into 2022, do you think it's time for them to make a push into the midfield proper, or will they need to be a bit more patient?
Well, we've got Alex Albon joining the team, which I think is going to play a huge role in their development. Alex is a very good driver. He's a very experienced driver. Obviously, been out of the sport now for how many years? Has it been 2 years he's been out of the sport, or just the 1 year?
It's just because Perez came in at the start of 2020, wasn't it? So.
Or no, sorry,
he came in the start of this year. Sorry, it was Albon at the end of last year. This is what COVID does to your memory. You're like, what year is it? Where even are we? But it was Albon last year in the Red Bull, and then Perez came in this year. Yeah.
So he's only had a year out of the sport, which actually isn't too bad in the grand scheme of things. We've seen drivers have a lot longer out of the sport and come back and being good. But the team is going in the right direction, and I think with Latifi being able to match and beat George on some occasions, and without the whole Belgium situation, they would have only been a point apart in the standings, because of Latifi scored at 1 point in Belgium, finishing in P9. So they would have been 1 point apart if Belgium wasn't classified, for example. Which gives me good feeling that actually that everyone rates George as a very good driver, and undoubtedly he is a very good driver. We've seen it time and time again. And Latifi was there or thereabouts, and hopefully if Albon can match Latifi or thereabouts again, we should see some progression into the midfield. And with simpler aerodynamics, they've got that Mercedes engine. That's not going away. And we know how strong that engine is. Fingers crossed that team pushes more into the midfield and challenges the likes of Aston Martin. I mean, Aston Martin scored, 77 points this year? So they're a good 50 points ahead of Williams. But who knows? It'll be exciting to see what happens.
I think Albon could shine if the car is right, because he's a good driver and he's been doing very well for Red Bull. He's been key to elements of their development, and obviously he did very well when he was at Toro Rosso. He struggled when he was at Red Bull, but that comes with its own difficulties, I suppose. So be exciting to have Albon back on. He seems like a very likeable driver, and he's got a lot of quality as well. So Williams, I think it'll be a good place for him. And yeah, the team just has that air of stability that it's lacked in previous seasons. And I know that the Dorilton acquisition might have upset some people in a traditional sense of having that kind of classic family-run team, but I think it's a necessary move if they're going to compete in the modern era, and they've done it at the right time. I think the best time would have been to do it quite a few seasons ago, but the second best time is now, as they say. So, and they've done it, and I think all signs point to an upward trajectory in the way that it doesn't for the previous two teams that we talked about, like you said.
I think it's interesting how you mentioned stability and how that team does look very stable. It feels like one of the most stable teams on the grid, despite the fact they've had their ups and downs. And I think that will play into Albon's hands, because Albon, with all due respect, has had a very unstable F1 career in the last 5 years, going from Toro Rosso to Red Bull, back down. Did he drop back down into Toro Rosso or AlphaTauri and then got binned? Did he just get binned straight out of Red Bull?
He went out of Red Bull, and he was still there, but he was like their development simulator kind of driver. So he did that. So they kind of kept him on. They didn't boot him out completely, but he was, it wasn't like he went back to Toro Rosso or anything like that, or AlphaTauri as it would have been,
So, it's fair to say that he's had a very up and down and unstable career, and maybe stability is what will make Alex Albon, flourish in a less pressurized team where he can fight for points, but he won't be fighting for wins. I won't be matched against the likes of Max Verstappen and expecting to beat the likes of Lewis Hamilton. Maybe he'll do really well at the Williams, and I would love to see it. I really would, because it'd be good to see him back on the grid and have that second chance. Right, there we have it. That's Williams for the 2021 season. Send us your thoughts or questions to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter, or you can get in touch at RacePerMinute.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to comment below and we will get back to you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a like rating. And if you like what we do, please consider subscribing for more wherever you are getting Race Per Minute, whether that's on YouTube or on your podcast app. And if you really want to support the show and help keep the quality content coming and receive some lovely rewards, you can do by donating as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute. That was Williams. The next team on our list, I believe, without looking at my paperwork, is Aston Martin. Is that true? Oh, we just talked about it, how they were the next team. So please join us next time for our 2021 review of the Aston Martin team.
See you then.